The air had a shape that night, as if the world itself had been carved from glass. At 70 Freundequine, the forest did not so much hold you as reroute you. Breath became white knives, the wind a thin wire that tugged at scarves and thought. Snow swallowed sound. Even the thud of her own boots was softened into a slow, reluctant hush. She moved as one who had lived with this country for years, who knew the twitch of the pines and the map of old tracks by memory. A cast-iron stove warming a small wooden cabin and the shadow of a white bird that once slept on her sill were the outlines of a life stitched to this lonely place. She was not young, but she had the kind of strength you only get from cold mornings and long, careful living. Her hands had known wood and rope, and the small iron of the stove. Tonight, they were knotted in mittens that let little feeling in. She could only sense the path by touch and the shallow rhythm of her breath. The snow lay up to her knees in places, a mute ocean that had taken the shape of the land and swallowed it. She told herself she could make one more turn, one more ridge, and be home. The snow betrayed her. A hidden lip of mud under the ice gave way, and her boot vanished. One step, and the ground closed a quiet hand around her calf. Mud wrapped itself around the fabric like an animal that had been waiting for a wrong foot. Her other leg slipped. The world narrowed to a single, bright, stupid panic. She could not move free. The cold wrote itself onto her skin. Hands that tried to find leverage came back with nothing. Her breath came thin, and each exhale was a small, bright thing blown into the air and broken. She called, but the forest held its breath. Her voice ran into the trees and came back thin as a thread. The wind did not answer. She thought of the stove and the way the cast iron used to groan like a slow animal, of the bird that had once sat on her sill and watched the snow fall with black, patient eyes. You can almost see her reach with a mittened hand toward the memory of that white breast against the window pane, as if remembering could pull warmth into her limbs. If this story is finding a corner of your heart, stay with it now. There is a small thing coming that matters. Her heart quickened with the cold's double pressure, a physical ache, and the sharper panic of being utterly alone. She wriggled and pulled, the mud clinging like a secret. Time became measured by little failures, fingers that would not hold, a boot that would not budge. The horizon was only the same gray as everything else. There were no lights, no smoke, no footprints that belonged to a living creature aside from her own. Then, from somewhere beyond the periphery of sense, came another presence. It did not belong to a map of seasons. It was a heavy shape whose very wrongness sharpened the night. A lion, enormous and silent, a beast that did not belong in these pines. She saw it like a heat shimmer in a fever, huge shoulders under a coat of fur, a head held like a question. The lion moved slow. It did not roar. Sound would have been wasted in the night. Its gaze, when it found her, felt like the final tally of the world. There are nights when the mind fills with impossible things. Perhaps it had wandered from a circus. Perhaps it was a legend walked loose from a story. Perhaps it was the mind's last, perfect terror, a hallucination shaped by cold and fear. The story keeps its options. What matters is the effect. The world tipped toward an ending. Her shaking became less about the cold and more about the weight of that impossible animal moving closer through the snow. She watched it approach, breath like glass, boots stuck in a soft, traitorous earth. For a moment, courage was simply recognition, the clear knowledge that this was not the end she had chosen. She tested her voice. It came out as a thin thing, half prayer, half warning. The lion padded nearer, a soft thunder on powder, and the night narrowed into the space between her and that wide, moving head. Farther back, in the little wooden pocket of the world she had left hours earlier, a memory pulsed like a drum. The white stork she had once sheltered, so unlikely and fragile against the dark, had a way of returning to the things it knew. She had fed it scraps from the stove, wrapped its leg once against cold, watched it preen by the window as snow fell. The animal's life was nothing like the lion's. It lived in slow balance with the human things in its orbit. Now, somewhere beyond the trees, the stork was a figure gathering itself into flight. The bird followed the traces the woman had left, a thin line of boot prints that cut through the unmaking wind. Its neck was long, and the white of its feathers caught the dim, making the stork look like a small moving flame in a charcoal world. It did not think in sentences. It moved by memory, by a stick of habit, and the pull of a place that had cradled it. The wind pulled at its wings, snow pressed against its back. Still it went, a pale stitch sewing the night to the person it remembered. As the bird closed, the scene narrowed into a series of close, jangling moments. The woman felt the lion's stare and wanted, with all the blunt force of survival, to pull free. She heard a distant clatter, then a sharp, insistent rustle as white wings beat the air. The stork arrived like a punctuation mark, a bright, impossible thing lifting into the small space between predator and prey. What the stork did cannot be rendered into grand heroics without stretching the truth. It had no scheme, no human cunning. It came and it called, a sound like stones being shaken, a sharp clack that turned the lion's head. It darted, then haltingly pecked at the dark mud near her boot, at the fringe of fabric. It beat its wings so close the air shifted against the lion's face, shifting something less of fear and more of confusion into the animal's motion. For a heartbeat, the night became a small theater of noises, a bird's urgent rattle, a woman's shallow breath, the soft scrape of frozen earth. The lion paused. In that pause, the world gave her a margin. She pushed, not with the full strength of youth, but with the kind of stubbornness that knows how to use a borrowed instant. Mud loosened in a slithering sigh. One boot slipped free. She heaved and twisted, the wet giving way like a secret letting go. It was small, awkward, and it was enough. She hauled herself to a crouch, then to a stagger that carried her to the firmer maple of a fallen trunk. The stork, white against the storm, hovered and then settled on a low branch, watching as if it too were figuring out what to do with a miraculous moment. The lion withdrew a few paces, uncertain. Whether it was the bird's strange closeness, a scent it did not understand, or the soft decoupling of a figure the animal had approached and found no easy ending for, it faded back into the trees. Perhaps it was never fully real. Perhaps it melted at the edges as a fever does when a new warmth comes into the room. Whatever the cause, the threat thinned like breath in air left too long. It did not explode into violence. It simply dissolved into the night's other strange shapes. She crawled toward the sound of her own voice, the echo of her small triumph, and felt the slow flush of heat returning as adrenaline and despair rewired. Above her the stork preened, as if adjusting its feathers after a storm. The bird's black eye turned toward her with an odd feathered calm. There was no human gratitude in its look, only a continued attention that matched the bond between people and the creatures who have lived near them. The woman reached out a hand. Her fingers trembled, but